Protests are taking place as a group of so-called wise men are trying to negotiate a transfer of power within the government. Also on the programme, anger grows in Pakistan over the US diplomat who shot dead 2 people he says were trying to rob him. Put him on trial now. Italian prosecutors call for action against Silvio Berlusconi over sex and abuse of power allegations. And little talk and less action. The latest negotiations between North and South Korea collapse after just 2 days. So thousands of people protesting and workers taking industrial action. 2 sets of people angry at Egypt's government and who say that they've got a lot to be angry about. And while they're unhappy with a repressive government and poor pay and conditions, others are trying to sort it all out. A group of so-called wise men have been negotiating to organise a transfer of power within the government. One of them is Amr Hamzawi, research director at the Carnegie Middle East Centre. He told us the government's not giving them any confidence.
The official position, be it from the vice president or the prime minister's position, is that the president is going to remain in office until September, and that he continues to practice his authorities and that he is responsible for putting Egypt on democratic transition path, which is basically our main problem, guys, be it in our committee or in the Tahrir Square. It is unacceptable because we lack trust in Mr. Mubarak's commitment to political reform, and even more so after we have been seeing the first announced steps by the ruling establishment in the last days. These do not mount to a reform package. These are minor steps where we are hearing that the state of emergency will be pending the security situation in the country, where we are hearing that the parliament will not be dissolved in spite of the fact that it kind of rigged elections, where we are hearing we are going to amend the constitution, but it's going to be the new president in September to decide in which direction Egyptian politics will be going. These are not reassuring steps, and we lack trust in what the establishment is doing, and analytically I see it as more of an attempt to consolidate the authoritarian system.
Let's hear now from one of our correspondents in Cairo, Ayman Mohyeldin, who says that the deadlock between the government and the protesters looks set to continue.
Well, the political standoff between President Hosni Mubarak's government and the so-called Committee of the Wise Men continues without any progress, really. The so-called Committee of the Wise Men has put forth their demands, which are also representative of some of the protesters' demands that President Hosni Mubarak step down and transfer power to Vice President Omar Suleiman to begin implementing constitutional reforms. But the president seems to be very much entrenched into holding on to power, at least until the end of his term in September. Many feel that is an attempt by the regime to consolidate its grip on power, and many simply feel they are just empty and false promises. They've seen promises about reform made in the past without being substantiated, and they fear this could possibly happen now. For his part, though, the belief is that if the president were to step down for any reason, he would transfer power to the speakers of the Egyptian parliament, and in that case, he would be forced, the speaker of the parliament would be forced to carry out elections in 60 days under the current constitution, and by many people's assessment, the current constitution is rigged in a way that it would favor the ruling National Democratic Party, because they would be the only ones allowed to nominate a candidate, and therefore the opposition parties would not be allowed to nominate any presidential candidate. So many are describing that really the ace in the president's back pocket, which is not allowing him to step down, and it's certainly something that is being used to back or push back the demands of the protesters and the opposition, saying it would lead to a bit of political vacuum and chaos without bringing the much-needed reforms that the protesters and other members of Egypt's opposition are demanding. Now, all of this is happening as the protesters continue in Liberation Square, with some of them moving closer to the symbolic heart of Cairo at the Parliament building. There's a sit-in taking place there that is lasting throughout the course of the evening. And all of this against the backdrop of some very interesting developments with Egypt's labor force. Thousands of workers representing different sectors and industry have gone on strike, and it's a momentum that many of the protesters say will add to their cause for President Hosni Mubarak to step down. Whether or not these labor strikes continue to grow in the coming days will be watched very closely, because they represent a very important element of Egyptian society and could widen and increase perhaps the pressure against Hosni Mubarak to step down.
That's Ayman Mohyeldin. Let's speak now to Dr. Issam Alarian, who's the spokesperson and a senior leader for the opposition group, the Muslim Brotherhood. He joins us now on the line from Cairo. I know, Doctor, you won't have heard, but a few moments ago, you only came on the line during Ayman's report there, but we were hearing from Amr Hamzawi, one of the so-called wise men, who said that the government isn't giving them any confidence in the current round of negotiations. But what do you make of what our correspondent was saying there about this 60 days in which to call elections and the ace in the president's back pocket? I mean, it sounds pretty reasonable that the president wants to get the constitutional amendments right before stepping down so that elections aren't rigged in his party's favour.
I think the president and the vice president and the cabinet is equivocal. They are not keen to transfer power safely and smoothly to the people. We are facing now a revolution by the people. The national consensus now is asking Mr. Mubarak to step down. Before he steps down, he must dissolve the parliament and lift the martial status. Then the chairman of the High Constitutional Court can take post for a temporary period and arrange with the cabinet of technocrats or coalition cabinet to prepare for a parliamentary election. The rigid parliamentarian elected, which he is now, cannot make the amendments. It is not eligible to discuss the amendments of the Constitution. We need a free and fair elected, electable parliament that can discuss the amendments of the Constitution before going to the presidential election.
So what happens if the president steps down? Supposing for a moment there's constitutional chaos and that the country falls further into disarray. What do you make of the foreign minister's comments, which have emerged in the past couple of hours, saying that we have to preserve the constitution even if it's amended? Otherwise, if there's chaos, the armed forces will intervene to control the country, which would lead to a very dangerous situation. That the day after Vice President Omar Suleiman warned that a coup d'etat was possible in the country.
It is a strange situation. Egyptian people are asking for real democracy. And the vice president said that the Egyptian people are not ready for democracy. Egyptian people need a civil state, democratic state. And the vice president is threatened by a coup d'etat, military coup d'etat. That is not that suitable time for military intervention all over the world. It is something historical now that the military can take power in any country. Egypt is not easy, and I think the Egyptian people are not going to face the military and not going to face the army. And also the army is a part of this population, part of this society. The men of the soldiers and the officers in the party cannot go to this way. This is a false threat. It is something also vocal which can make some serving some time for taking breath for the regime. It is clear that now the regime wants to exist in power for 6 months, and he is maybe bugging that the people can lose hope or the people can get fatigued. And this is not, because now in the 16th day we now face a million protesters in Tahrir Square only in a day, not for millions protesters.
Okay. Dr. Alarian, many thanks indeed. Dr. Issam Alarian there, senior leader and spokesperson of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now let's take you to Pakistan, where emotions are running high after an American shot and killed 2 armed men that he says were trying to rob him. Anti-US protests have been taking place in Lahore ever since the incident almost 2 weeks ago. Kamal Haider reports.
A diplomatic row is brewing between Pakistan and the US over the arrest of an American citizen. Raymond Davis is being held in the shooting deaths of 2 people in Lahore. He says they were trying to rob him at gunpoint. The US Embassy asserts he's a diplomatic employee. and his arrest is a clear violation of the Vienna Convention. So far, Pakistan disagrees. Davis has already appeared in court and his case continues.
This U.S. diplomat gunned down 2 innocent civilians in broad daylight. We want to inquire what he was doing on the streets of Lahore with a pistol and all alone.
Events after the shooting added to the existing outrage in Pakistan. That's when a U.S. consulate vehicle drove the wrong way down a one-way street, killing a motorcyclist before leaving the scene. Tens of thousands of protesters have rallied in Lahore to demand justice. The U.S. sent a senior congressional delegation to demand that Islamabad free Davis. However, fearing a major backlash, the Pakistani government says it will let the court decide. That's not good enough for some U.S. lawmakers, who are now threatening to stop aid to Pakistan. The event is now creating a complex scenario, with Pakistan jeopardizing its relations with its largest provider of economic and military assistance, while the USA stands to alienate one of its major allies in the war next door in Afghanistan. Kamal Haider, Al Jazeera, Islamabad.
Well, Anwar Iqbal is Washington correspondent for Dawn newspaper. He's just been attending a briefing at the Pakistan embassy on this case. He joins us now live. Before we discuss the nitty-gritty of the case, perhaps you'll tell us what you heard at the briefing.
Well, it was a briefing by the ambassador because, you know, in Pakistan, he has been accused of issuing too many visas to American citizens, particularly defense contractors. And what the ambassador said was that it was wrong, that all the visas were approved in Islamabad. And he also explained that, you know, when you have diplomatic relations with a country and when it is a very close ally, you just cannot say that we like some aspects of this relationship and we do not like other aspects. I mean, we have diplomatic ties with the United States, and therefore this man, which the U.S. Embassy says is a diplomatic employee, he enjoys immunity under Vienna Convention, and we should respect the convention. But I think the ambassador finds himself in a very, very difficult position here. During the last week, he was summoned at least 4 times to the White House and as many times to the State Department to explain Pakistan's position. You know that the State Department, the